That's James Bishop gathering sounds for his debut album, Bodybound, a record in which all the sounds were recorded out in the wild and then manipulated to make music. We found James at his home studio in San Diego, California, where he spent the better part of the last 5 years turning the sounds of the Pacific Crest Trail into songs.
I feel like when people hear that I made a record entirely out of found sounds and samples I recorded with my phone while hiking on the Pacific Crest Trail, they're sort of like, oh, I can't really imagine what that sounds like. And I'm like,
Right.
yeah, that's exactly how I felt kind of the whole time while making it. But, the reaction has been really good. And I think it feels really good for me, for sure, to release these songs and to get them out there and to share them with people, and have had some really special moments with people at shows and stuff like that, telling me what the songs have meant to them over the past handful of months. So yeah, the reaction has been positive. I'm really happy to see this music meeting people where they're at.
So when did you have this brainstorm, this idea to make a record out of sounds picked up on your iPhone?
I was an idealistic college student. I was just on the verge of graduating from college, and I was like, in the US there's a 6-month time frame before you have to start paying back your student loans after you graduate college. So I was like, well, I kind of want to use this time to do something that I wouldn't be able to do in any other time. So I wanted to hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And, the way my brain works is just, you give me an inch and I take 20 feet, you know what I mean? So it was just sort of a thing of, well, I could do this trail, and then maybe, I could bring a guitar, and maybe I could write some songs, and you know what, why don't I make an album while doing it? And why don't I, make the entire album out of sounds that I record on this trip? That sounds great. So it was kind of all this very quick flash of ideation that happened just while I was like in my senior year of college, and I just decided to make it happen. Yeah.
All right. So for folks who are not from the area, the Pacific Crest Trail is pretty big. It's like 2,600 miles long, obviously along the Pacific coast.
Yeah.
What else can you tell us about it?
It's a long distance hiking trail that runs from the border of US and Mexico to the border of US and Canada. So it's 2,658 or 9 miles, about that. I did half of it. So I walked from the border of US Mexico up to a town called Chester, California, which is in the kind of Mount Lassen area, which is, near it's in Northern California, not too far from the border, but the trail runs along kind of all the mountain ridges along California and Oregon and Washington. And so it's a cross country thing. At the end of it, you go like, I think 9 miles or so into Canada. But at the beginning of it, you start out, you're hiking through the Mojave Desert, and there's about, I'd say like 500 or so, maybe 600, 700 miles of desert. And then the next section is all the Sierra Nevada mountain range. So I hiked the portion through the desert and through the Sierra Nevada range, and finished my hike right at the end of the Sierra Nevada.
Right. And you started it like 5 or 6 years ago, the hiking bit, right?
Yeah. So I did all of the hiking bit of it in 2017. I think it was right around now, a little like a month. It was like May 13th or 15th or something that I left, and I finished the trail in late October. So
right.
I during that portion, I was hiking and obviously collecting sounds and writing songs and things like that. And then the rest of the record, the bulk of it really took place over the next 4.5 years, where I was sort of editing my lyrics and rewriting stuff, and then trying to figure out how to make sense of all of these sounds and stuff and turn them into music, which is
So what kind of sounds were you listening for?
Kind of anything that sounded musical to me. I think, the easiest thing to find on the trail was stuff that you can make percussion and rhythm and drums out of, because it's sort of this primal thing. I think drums in general, they're sort of like, oh, you take 2 sticks and bang them together and you got, a sort of primitive drum, essentially. So that was fairly intuitive. But what I was really looking for, and the stuff that really excited me while I found it, was just stuff that had any sort of tone or pitch to it. So sometimes you'd get some logs or something that would just sound really resonant, and you're like, oh, cool. Like I can make something out of that, And then other times it was like screeching metal gates that just had this, horrible screech, but it had like a tone to it and a pitch to it. And you're like, oh, I could take that and I could rework that into something that feels sort of harmonic, melodic, musical. And so I think the sounds I was looking for was really anything, but those were the things that felt like the most precious things that I came across.
So with technology, you mentioned the metal gates, and I think you kind of turned them into some stringy type
Yeah,
sounding things. Is
exactly.
it
Yeah.
possible to turn anything into anything?
I, After doing this record, I think so. I feel like if you can combine enough processes and enough steps, you can kind of get to anywhere from any place. I mean, maybe not actually, you know what I mean? But you can get sort of a gesture in a direction, kind of with, there's so many ways you can manipulate audio, especially with, like you said, with technology. I mean, just it's gotten so infinite, I think, with computers, and you can, you know, if like you can pitch stretch stuff, and you can stretch the time of stuff, you can shift it around, you can completely change the way a sound is. And I think when I first started the record, I was excited about the idea of recording my own sounds, because it felt like, okay, I could have some sort of sound palette that feels unique, that feels my own, and I can make something out of that. Because, you know, I grew up in a time where everybody was getting a copy of GarageBand or Logic or Pro Tools or something in their home
Right.
computers. And I think it kind of created an environment for me where, as somebody who also had a copy of Pro Tools and a Mac, you know, computer in my bedroom when I was, you know, 13 or 14 or whatever, it sort of created an environment where I wanted to find some new sounds that I could call my own, that weren't just downloaded from the internet or whatever. And so going out in search of that kind of thing, when I started it, I felt like, okay, cool, this will be a restriction on me. You know, this will force me into a direction. But I found pretty quickly that with the technology and with Pro Tools, with all these tools, you can just complete, like, it was even more infinite. It felt like it was like, okay, wow, well, now I really have to think about, because I've taken these sounds and they don't even sound like nature anymore. You know, it just sounds completely different. And
Yeah.
so at some point you get into a process of going, am I hearing the original sound, or am I hearing the sound of the computer? And that kind of became a fun tension for me as a writer too, in the process of making the record.
And of course, there's one thing to have sounds that sound cool, but you need to turn them into songs at some point. So
Yeah.
how did you make that transition?
Ah, that was tough. There was a lot of bad demos, I'll tell you that. A lot of really bad demos. I was kind of just, it's a maze, you know, making a record. I think many people who make music or make any kind of art or whatever will say that it's just trying to know where to go, and know how to navigate that process. It feels like you're navigating a maze with a blindfold on, you know?
Right.
And so the process of finding out how to bring some form and shape and legibility to those sounds, it was a long process. I think it was also a process of me trying to figure out how to make music in a way that I hadn't made it before, because I'm used to, you know, writing songs on acoustic guitar or piano or something and recording them, you know, in my studio and whatever. So trying to figure out how to step into this more electronic experimental place, it took me a while, and I think it was truly just trial and error over a long period of time, because I had no idea what I felt like I was completely out of my element the whole time, which was really fun. It was a great creative challenge, you know.
So was there a breakthrough moment when you realized you were onto something?
Yeah, maybe like right at the end, right at the end of
Oh man.
the. Yeah, it didn't ever feel like, I think the experience of making this record was mostly one of dissatisfaction. I was like, this is not quite it. You know, I'm still looking for the thing. I at some point I felt like maybe I'd never find it. You know, but towards the end I started to sort of get it. I was like, okay. I had honed in enough of a focus on the thing, and I think I had gone through enough seasons of my life by that point that it was like, okay, I can, you know, I can take these crazy experiments where I went way too far with it, and I can incorporate them into this record. And I can also, you know, now with some more, I guess, experience with the thing, I can put some more sounds in there that are a little more organic, that are a little more closer to their source, and I can combine the two. And now I'm interested. Now I'm kind of excited about the tension between these sort of elements. And it felt like that was kind of the I guess the philosophical breaking point for me, was realizing that I could incorporate both the hyper processed and also the hyper naturalistic in the same space and that they could overlap with each other. And that was more interesting than trying to make either an album that was like acoustic guitar around a campfire or an album that was completely experimental and completely, removed from its original source material. It was like, okay, cool. I can kind of, these things, these urges within me can be in conversations with one another. And I think I started to get that maybe in like the last year or so. And really most of the actual finishing of the album happened within a handful of months. I mean, it was years of experiments, years of trying stuff, it not really working. And then at some point at the very end, it was like, this has got to happen. Like, I got to move on with my life. Something's got to break. And I figured it out. So,
yeah. So, I mean, that takes quite a bit of patience and perseverance. Is that who you are?
I've come to realize that it's a mixture of patience, perseverance, ambition, and also stubbornness and, self-indulgence. I think it is. I think like a combination of those things is true to me. I think I've always been a really ambitious person. And, when you undertake something kind of ambitious like that, something that doesn't quite make sense, it's sort of, it requires a lot of patience, but also stubbornness. I mean, it's like, it's hard for me to quit something. It's hard to let go, there's a mixture. I'm like, yeah, I think I'm pretty patient, but I'm also just a stubborn person. So I was like, this is going to work. I'm going to figure it out.
Now you mentioned you released a bunch of these already, and there's some videos and things. So maybe we can just pick one, and you can kind of take us through how it came. There's one called Gutters, where there's a video of you wandering around in a creek somewhere. Yeah. So that seems like a good one to talk about because we can show folks a little of the video and play a little of the track at the same time. So what can you tell us about that?
I swallowed every trace of you that passed along the river, but tell me everything you know, the grace, the pain, I want to know the gutters in my liver, I wanna know
Gutters was actually one of the songs that came towards the end. It came together pretty quickly. I think most of it I made in about a day of just making stuff on my computer. It was sort of an effort that I sort of felt like, okay, I've got this body of material and I need some way to sort of get into it. I need to sort of introduce this concept to people. There was kind of, it's a part of the arc of the beginning of the record. There's another song called Earthgate that goes into this song. And Earthgate starts out really, really kind of true to its source. There's squeaking gates and the sound of crickets and wind and I'm
like
walking.
Thunder in there as well.
There's thunder. Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like this is the nature that you're kind of expecting to hear. And Gutters was a way for me to sort of like take you out of that into this more process, electronic, more aggressive place, I think, with the record. So it holds that place in the record for me. And the song is, it sort of started as this daydream, I guess I had about going to this river and seeing, it was like this river was the past, the present, and the future. It was like time itself. And there was like garbage floating down the river, and it was like stuff from my past and stuff from my family's past, and it was stories from my grandparents and garments and furniture and just all this stuff that I felt like had something to do with what made me me. And then as it flowed past me, it was kind of like my stuff was going into this river, into the future. And I think it was sort of like a way for me to process my place in time, in my family, in the world, as just kind of taking the past and passing it off into the future. And so, yeah, it was, writing that song for me was a process of exploring some of those themes within myself, identity, things like that. But, it had this sort of like, there's a sort of fear to that for me. There's a mystery, there's an intrigue, there's a darkness to it, there's beauty to it. And so I think I was trying to kind of get at some of those emotions and communicate them with the song. So yeah.
Yeah. And in an ideal world, how do you see people or listening or experiencing these songs? Listening on headphones, having it on while they're doing the dishes.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best way to?
I don't know. I feel like any way anybody wants to listen is great with me. I think there's a lot of, I would say, like, this music is pretty emotional. It's also it can be aggressive at times. I think it's like, my ideal thing would be that people would listen to it. I think there's music that I enjoy listening to that feels like it serves sort of a purpose in my life of being on while I'm doing this or while I'm doing that. I think a lot of my favorite music is music that really demands your attention and demands that you listen to it.
Right.
And that would be ideal for me. I mean, I feel like that'd be ideal for a lot of people who make music, but I driving in the car and just listening into the music, and I think it's an introspective record. I think it kind of calls, like, if you're really listening to it, I think it calls you inward, and it calls you to sort of reflect upon your own life or whatever, because I think I was doing a lot of that while I was making it. So I imagine that this music is probably best listened to kind of in a place where you could be open to some of those explorations while hiking. Maybe I feel like, you know what, actually, yeah, listening to this while hiking would probably be the best.
Sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's interesting is that this is your debut album. So usually when we hear a new artist, we're like, oh, let me see, who were inspired by? Did you listen to some Dylan or some Joni Mitchell, or what was your motivation? But who would you say that kind of inspired you to make did anyone, or is this completely off the charts?
I think this record, I would say, in terms of artists, artists like Bon Iver, I think, is probably my biggest inspiration personally. It was like the first music I came across as a college student where I was like, oh, okay, this resonates with me in some really deep way. So I would say Bon Iver, or really anything Justin Vernon has been a part of. As an artist, I also think, there are other things though too for me. I come from a musical family, and I learned how to produce from my uncle. He's a record producer. I would say was that?
It's Dave Darling, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Dave. With Brian Setzer. I did my research.
Yeah, nice work. Yeah, yeah. Well, as a teenager, I was growing up, going up to his studio and assisting him on some of these records with Brian Setzer or whoever. And I think those experiences, I mean, massively influenced me. They're not necessarily a direct artist influence, but to get to a place where I was making music on Pro Tools in my bedroom, and then, felt like, I got to make something different, like, whatever, like that sort of urge came from, really being introduced to producing as a thing as a kid, you know what I mean? So I think that was something big for me. And I would say also just, there's entire sort of genres of music. I think dance music, like, really influenced this record. It's not necessarily a dance music record. It's not like EDM, but there's definitely stuff in there that's like very rhythmic, very polyrhythmic, and specifically African music in particular. I was dating somebody in East Africa for a few years over the course of making this record, so I was going back and forth to Uganda and stuff, and hearing a lot of the traditional music there, and making friends with people in the music business there, and people who were translating Ugandan traditional music into EDM and stuff like that. And I think those sorts of exposure really influenced what I wanted to make, something more rhythmic, driving, like an obsession with polyrhythm and stuff. There isn't necessarily like direct rhythms from that part of the world, but there's this sort of like this sort of influence of the vibe or the aim of the music. So I would say that maybe another artist would be Tom York. I take a lot of inspiration too from stuff that Tom York does. I think
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So stuff like that,
Now you're talking about different parts of the world.
Yeah.
I'm in New Zealand. Obviously, I'm American. You can tell we understand each other. So,
yeah.
But here in New Zealand, I've been here for like 30 years now. There's huge expanses of wilderness. We call it the bush here instead of the woods.
Yeah.
And there are no mammals that are native to the country, but lots of birds. So maybe when I was thinking and reading about how you made this record, I was wondering how it would sound different if you did a similar thing, tramped from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island, recorded your things, and ended up with what? A lot
Yeah.
of birds. Well, a lot of birds. But
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you thought about
Honestly,
that?
yeah. Well, yeah, I would, gosh, I would love to walk across New Zealand. That sounds amazing. Also, just birdsong in particular is so emotional and beautiful. I was making some music in my studio yesterday with a friend of mine, and we were downloading some royalty-free bird calls from the like Yellowstone National Park website. And I was like, wow, just there's so much variety in bird song and the way different birds sound. Some are higher, some are lower, some sound like they're dying, some sound like they're
Right.
just calling out to heaven. It's just like, yeah, I would love to make more music with bird song. I feel like there's a lot there. Also, just there's so much character in so many different bird calls. So yeah, that would it would probably be pretty different, Also, the landscape and the way that influences the record. I feel like, I don't know if this wouldn't be immediately perceptible, but as somebody who lives in California and has now walked through these different the Mojave and the Sierra, I really do feel like this record sounds like it makes sense to me. Listening back, I'm like, yeah, this does feel inspired by California. Like it's a very expansive place, and stuff is really big here, and it's really dramatic differences between the desert. You're one day you're in the desert, the next day you're in the Sierra, and I think that sort of dynamic and that sort of grandeur definitely played into what I decided to make. So
Yeah, you have a track called "Fall Together, Fall Apart," which is definitely expansive. That kind of, it feels like a good entry point for the album if somebody was possibly trying to find their way through what you're doing.
Definitely. Yeah, that's an interesting song to bring up because that's the middle, the exact middle point of the record, and I think it is sort of, it's this song that is sort of like a sinew, a tendon. It ties together the sort of beginning and ends of the record, and I think it's this moment where a lot of the rhythm pauses and it becomes a little bit more forthright emotionally. And I think, that song is really special to me, really important to me, and I'm really proud of it. And I think that would be a really good entryway into some of the themes on the album for sure.
Right. So once the record is out, it's kind of a difficult one to tour, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Well, yeah, gosh, it's crazy you say that. I spent months trying to figure out how to play this music live because it was just scratching my head going like, well, I can't necessarily just play guitar or sing, and even having a band doesn't even quite make sense. You know what I mean? It was just So I spent months just building this Ableton Live rig that I kind of mixed together live performed vocal effects and harmonizers and stuff with, I play guitar, and then I've also got this Ableton Live rig with a drum pad set up where I can create some of these beats live with the sounds that I made, and then also kind of loop them, and then the live show kind of goes through different parts of the songs and also expands in moments that the record doesn't and contracts in moments that the record doesn't. So it took me a while to figure out how to even play this stuff live. I still feel like I'm at the beginning of working that out in a live setting because it changes every single show that I do. But yeah, even just getting to the point of being like, how would I play this live and then tour it? You know what I mean? It was a lot more of, getting comfortable with computers and relying on my computer for a live setting, which is something new to me.
Yeah, and I go to a lot of gigs, and watching people loop and do all that. It used to be kind of gimmicky, but now it's everybody's doing it. So the technology is catching up to what people want to do, which is probably the perfect time and place for you to be able to do what you're doing.
Yeah, I would definitely say like that was something for me. I feel too that live looping can oftentimes sort of feel a little gimmicky and stuff, and so it's crazy now what Ableton can do. I mean, it's just, you can automate all these parameters to start recording your voice at this point and your guitar at this point, and then this stuff can like kind of loop in the set, and then you can build it out with effects. It doesn't necessarily feel like I'm just jamming and making beats on my guitar, but it's like it's crazy how you can immerse it in the entire sort of experience of a song. It's pretty cool. I'm super new to it still, so I'm like still figuring it out and still learning what it can do, but it's pretty exciting for me.
Excellent. All righty.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see what happens when the record comes out
Yeah,
eventually.
thank you. Yeah,
It's gonna
eventually.
be
Yeah,
exciting.
the quickest way to get there for me is just to try and get people on board. So thank you for,
Yeah. Well, we'll do
setting
what
up
we
this
can.
interview. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
And I just can't help but we have a bird here called the tui, which is unique to New Zealand. And
Yeah.
it has a unique song that everybody knows.
Right.
It'd be perfect for you. So come on down, record the bird,
Yeah.
walk from the north to the South Island, and see what happens.
I'd
We'd
love
to have you.
I'd love to do that. That sounds great. Is it New Zealand that I heard there was like some festival for that bird or something, or is that?
Well, the TUI, the awards that they give for the music awards, which I just had
Yeah,
last
yeah.
week, are called the TUI Awards.
Okay. So
So
that's
that
why
might
I've
be
heard
what
of
you
it.
heard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I'd love to do it. I'm on
And
my
you
way
have,
right now.
You have like family from the Philippines or something?
Yeah,
Is
that's
that
right.
So it's
Yeah.
practically around the corner. It's in the same part.
Yeah, maybe when I go visit some of my family in the Philippines, I'll stop by New Zealand. I heard it's so beautiful, so I would love to come.
If you enjoyed this episode of the 13th Floor's Music Talk series, please be sure to subscribe to the website or to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram and wherever you find your podcasts. There's a whole lot more to discover.